Okay, we're going to get started here. Welcome everyone to Mindful Mondays from a Distance. Today's topic is goal setting. My name is Kara Button, and I am the Game Plan Advisor here at the CSI Calgary, Canadian Sport Institute Calgary. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you today's facilitator, Elaine Hing. Elaine is a mental performance consultant with us. She's been working in the field for 14 plus years. She works with a lot of athletes from a variety of sports, but primarily here at CSI Calgary, she's played an important role with the speed skaters in the OVAL program. Elaine loves to travel, try new restaurants, and drink good wine. So if those aren't great goals to have and goal setting challenges, I don't know what is. So I'll let her take over from here. Enjoy the session. I should mention a couple housekeeping things. You are all on mute. If you have any questions throughout the session, you can put them in the chat box, and towards the end, there will be time for Q&A, and we'll make sure those questions get addressed. Thank you. Enjoy the session. Elaine, thank you.
Great, thanks so much. First off, a big thank you to both Annie and Kara with the CSI Calgary, and to Game Plan for organizing so many useful sessions for both coaches and athletes across the country. So I'm Elaine Hing. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really fortunate to be with the CSI Calgary as an MPC there. And I work with athletes and coaches from grassroots to Olympic and pro level. So I feel really fortunate to be there. I do work with a lot of winter sport, however, just being based in Calgary. I do work with a ton of sports across the board: wheelchair basketball, skateboarding, sport climbing, alpine, kind of you name it. And I'm really fortunate to be able to do that. And I'm also lucky to be able to teach 5 of the courses offered with the ACD program. And I really look forward to watching that program continue to grow. So we're going to get started here. So I do want to thank them for organizing these. We have a huge turnout today, and I'm really excited about that. You're also going to have the opportunity to watch this later on. So if you are interrupted, you can always tune in later on with a link that they're going to provide tomorrow. So I just wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. So in this time of reconciliation, along with the spirit of gathering, it's important to me to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in Calgary, where I'm located today. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. But here in Calgary, the meeting of the Elbow and Bow Rivers is such a special place because it's a historical place of gathering and storytelling, ceremony, and equality. And I'd kind of like to bring that spirit of gathering here today, even though we're gathering in a much more non-traditional way, and spread across Canada in this moment. So I just want to find out if our game planner wouldn't mind launching our first poll. We want to find out who you coach. Are you coaching mostly individual athletes or team sports, or maybe even a mix of both? And I know that I was going to launch the poll from here, but as I'm sharing my screen, I'm not able to. So if our, if our game plan advisor is able to do that, that'd be great. Awesome, I see some coming in here. Lots of individual sport athletes I see. Okay, so mostly individual sport athletes. I love that. Thanks for sharing that poll with us. We do have a bit of a mix. Some are coaching both, which is always fascinating. I know that a lot of people are coaching and we can close that poll there. And I know that a lot of people are coaching individual sports, but training as a team. So that always brings a new dynamic to things as well. I think that's really interesting. So I'll just shut down that poll there and we'll get going here. I can turn off that chat. Forgive me, I'm used to WebEx, not Zoom here. So this is new for me. So the plan, we're kind of going through the intro and plan, and I know that a lot of people tend to think that goal setting is so boring, but we're gonna give some reasons why we need to do it, talk about sort of the gist of goal setting, sort of the basics. And then I'm gonna take you through something that I like to call upside down goals. You may have worked with it before, you may not have. We're gonna talk about what do we do after we know what kind of goal setting we're gonna be doing. And then I think it's really important for us to chat about debriefing. And so I'm going to take you through some of the basics of debriefing. And I think that can be really important. So it ties in nicely with goal setting. Of course, we're going to leave a ton of time for a Q&A at the end. And I'll pop on my video and be able to see a little bit better after that. So that will be great. Please do feel free to answer questions. And if you think of them later, you always feel free to contact me afterwards as well. So let's be real here. You've got a lot on your plate. When the season gets going, you've got even less time for the little things. So if we can get your athletes to successfully achieve some goals during this time, they'll be much more likely to successfully achieve the future goals when things really get started. I know we're in a strange time right now with COVID. But we also need to recognize that when people get back, they won't necessarily be where they were. And everyone's situation during this time has been different. So it's important to have compassion, to recognize that some have had amazing opportunities and time and equipment, a safe place to be, while others maybe haven't been. And to keep in mind that we may or may not be aware of those situations. So I think that's important. There's one thing that's been irking me a little bit during this time of COVID, and I'm sure you've all seen the articles, memes, and comments from people about how they say, if you don't come out of the isolation with a new skill or a new language or an impeccable house or perfectly organized closets, you've wasted it. But I was chatting to a coach and friend of mine last week, and I believe she's even on our call here today, and she realized how nice it was to be getting back to the basics. And sometimes reviews of what we already know can be really great for self-validation and for motivation. So once in a while, we tend to forget the basics because we've advanced so far past them. But it's my hope that today is a really great review for many of you, and then it can also provide you with a couple little new nuggets of wisdom or some motivation as you navigate this kind of tricky time, because it really is, right? So the basics are really good for everybody, even if we feel quite advanced past them. So during this time, the process is more important than ever. So we're really going to dive into that. We're not sure what our timelines will be. You know, we can plan for June or July or August and not have those plans to come to fruition until October, November, or even December. So we really need to be flexible in our planning. And we have to realize that what we do now is kind of like, we have to know that what we're doing now has an effect on where we will be later on. And this might seem really simple, but we're going to chat about choices and values as we move through today, because that can really be important with goal setting. And an athlete recently said to me, I've never been so far away from knowing when my next competition is. I thought that kind of really hit me. I've never been so far away from knowing when my next comp is. They have so many unknowns right now, as do you. So let's just put some of these plans in place. And all the NCCP documents talk about the necessity of building mental skills early on, out of context, so that these tools are strengthened during the training season and during your competition season. So during this completely unprecedented time, this is the time right now for most of you to be working on this sort of out of context type stuff. So we recognize that it's tricky, but we're going to work through this. So let's talk about the gist of goal setting. And we all know SMART goals, but do you know SHMART goals? And a great colleague of mine, Claire Fuster, she always does SHMART goals. And I thought I needed to add one more thing in there. We know the basics of goal setting. We know SMART goals, but I think it's important to recognize that particularly in these kinds of times, we need to be flexible. So we're going to go through what some of those are right now. So as you know, specific, it's described as, you know, the goal clearly identifies what you want to accomplish. I think we all know we need to keep those goals specific. It's not that I need to get faster. It's how am I going to get faster, and exactly how much faster do I need to be so I can work on what I need to do to get there. Now, changeable is a little bit different here. This is kind of something new to throw in, and I can't hear your roaring laughter about SMART goals, but I'm sure you're rolling your eyes a little bit. We have to make sure that we're being changeable and flexible at this time. So if you don't make a certain competition, or you get injured, or plans change, or a global pandemic happens, we have to make sure we're being flexible with that. And hard, if it's too easy, we tend to not gain the satisfaction that we need to move forward. Measurable goals just means that the goal can be compared to an expected result to determine success. So we can measure things in time, or weight, or distance, or, as you'll learn as we go through this, there's a lot of other ways to sort of measure things as well. But if we can't measure it, we don't know how far we've gotten. And keeping in mind, we need to know where we've started to know where we can go, right? So we always have to have a base point there too. Now, you probably usually see this as achievable. I like attainable because it needs to be within appropriate reach. Now, the athlete's knowledge and skill set, if applied appropriately and worked on, will actually allow them to achieve this goal. So we're kind of working between that hard and attainable line. We want it to be difficult enough to kind of have that hard work ethic that we need to get there, but it has to be attainable, or what some people like to call realistic enough to get there. So you may be thinking the next one is realistic, because a lot of the SMART acronyms use realistic next, but I really like to use relevant, because we need to find out whose goal is it. If you're setting goals for your athletes without their input, they won't really necessarily have that same level of buy-in. So keeping in mind, we're essentially facilitators for their goals, and we want to help to direct and guide them to what appropriate goals are, but make sure it's something that they're wanting to achieve. So we're really wanting to use the athletes for input on this. We don't want to necessarily direct it, but we want to give as much feedback as we can and hopefully guide them in the right direction. But we want that buy-in to come from them. It's sort of like, I often liken this to when you're in like a kindergarten class, and the first day they say, okay, what should our classroom rules be? And they're always so eager. It's like, put up your hand before you talk, ask before you go to the bathroom, or whatever it might be. But if they feel like they come up with those rules, the buy-in's a lot higher. And that's kind of on a very different level what we're working with here as well. And then timely. So we need to make sure that there's a deadline or approximate deadline to actually achieve this goal. So continuing on with the gist, we want to make sure that there is actually a benefit to your goal. Kind of referring back to the relevant piece there. Whose goal is it? Is it something we actually need to do? Is it something that's appropriate for our level and where we're at and what our bigger goals can be? Along with the benefit, we want to recognize that there will be certain obstacles at play as well. And if we can anticipate what some of those obstacles might be, we can help plan to deal with them, or even to avoid them when necessary. And this isn't really a perfect situation, and we can't plan for absolutely everything, but we can try. So, before a Canada Games or Olympic Games, we tend to go through a ton of scenarios that have happened in the past, even if they may seem unlikely, so that we can try to avoid conflict with anything. And I think it's really important for us to identify, what might stand in my way of this goal as we go through this. So benefits obviously is the relevant piece, but what could maybe hold me back? What are some roadblocks or some speed bumps along the way? And if you have some really good dialogue with your athletes early on about these obstacles, the fear might not be there as much, because they know that they have a plan to deal with what might come up. So you've heard of process or performance versus outcome goals. Outcome goals are basically, what do you want to achieve? This can be things like standings or final times or making it to a specific comp or level. And these often are not 100% within the athlete's control. For instance, they could have the best race of their life or knock out like a killer PB, and they still don't make top standing because someone else was faster or jumped higher or threw further. So process and performance goals are essentially, how are you going to get there, right? such as improvements in fitness level or increasing PB times by changing technique or gaining or losing mass due to nutrition. So we usually want to break down these outcome goals into process and performance goals. So basically, what is it going to take to get there? And then how can I work to achieve that? And I'll show you an easy way to do that. So keep in mind, goals aren't just physical. I think often we turn just to those ones. And I think it's important to recognize that you can measure almost anything on what's called a Likert scale, Likert, Likert scale. You can turn anything possible into a 1 to 10 scale. So rate of perceived exertion, 1 to 10. Rate of enjoyment, 1 to 10. How good you are at visualization, 1 to 10. I think you kind of get the picture there, but we can really start practicing with that kind of language. And sometimes athletes tend to have a hard time putting emotion or feeling or how they're doing into words. So if we can give some other language for them to use as well and get used to that, if we want to use that Likert scale, the 1 to 10, that can sometimes be helpful as well. Because remember, we don't want to be putting words in their mouth, but I think it can give you a better idea of where they're at if sometimes you're not necessarily relying on those emotional words, but a Likert scale. So, I mean, short, medium, and long-term goals, you probably already know a ton about that. We have those long-term or dream goals, and we can break goals down into literally months or seasons or bi-weekly or weeks or even days. What am I getting out of this training session today? Or if you have 2-a-days, what am I getting out of this session right now or the next 2 hours? So we can really break it down into those really, really short goals. And that can sometimes keep the motivation high as well, because we kind of get to check the box a little bit. And when people get to cross things off a to-do list or check a box, I mean, it's a bit of people kind of like that. Right? We like to check the box. We want to be intentional about it. So we're not just taking things off the box just to say it's done. So we want to make sure we're intentional, but it can feel good to get some of those things finished. We want to tell people because research shows us that if we share the goals, we're a lot more likely to actually achieve them. Being held accountable by others can help. And this can be through teammates, through your coaching staff or your integrated support team. It can just be through friends and family. I have some athletes that sometimes say things like, well, I use an app on my phone and it reminds me for my goals. So there's a lot of goal setting apps that you can use. Or they'll put, Post-its on their bathroom mirror in the morning when they're brushing their teeth. They make sure they see it and they can kind of be focused on what do I need to do today. Or, they'll have something with a magnet on the fridge. So it's a good reminder. Or they'll have, for younger athletes, have a parent remind them or to check in and say, hey, how are you doing with those goals? And, all the articles that you ever read about, staying fit and going to the gym, all those typical New Year's resolution type thing. It's always about being held accountable, right? Making sure that we're following that SMART goal setting, but being held accountable by other people. So having a training partner or having someone that's checking in on us, that can be really helpful too. And then it's okay to reward that progress, right? We can kind of keep your motivation high by celebrating those little wins along the way. We just want to make sure that those rewards are lining up with our values and what we're actually wanting to achieve. That's a really important piece there. So we're going to talk about upside down goals a little bit. And this is something that's really easy to implement. And because we have so many differing levels and different types of sports here, we're going to be super, super basic. So forgive the really basic examples here, but I think you're going to get the gist based on what you need for your own sport. So what we're going to do is get out, you don't have to do it now, but in general, you're going to get out a piece of 8.5 by 11, turn it sideways, landscape. And then what we're going to do is write down our goal in the bottom right-hand corner. So maybe let's say this dream goal that your athlete wants. They, I want to go to the Olympics or Paralympics, or I want to go to the World Championships, depending on their sport. And your question to them should be something along the lines of, okay, well, what do we have to do to get there? If we're going to get to the Olympics or Paralympics or World Champs, what do we need to achieve first? And so the answer might be something like, okay, well, I have to, win nationals to get there. I have to qualify under nationals to make sure I can get there. Okay, so what do we need to do to qualify for nationals? And on we go. I got to win provincials and I have to win regionals. And maybe I have to do like locals or cities or something like that. So of course, it's all dependent on age and sport, but we really sort of want to start from the bottom and then end up on the top left-hand corner of wherever we are essentially now, right? So what is my next goal that I want to achieve? And these are kind of those outcome goals that we talked about. And remember, these outcome goals aren't 100% in our control. And that can be a tricky part, because we think sometimes if we do everything we can, we just might not be able to get there. But remember that there's other competitors there too. So it can be a bit of a hard blow just to focus on those outcome goals and maybe not make one of those goals because someone else just happened to be better at that point. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about, okay, so if you win cities, what are you going to do to get to regionals? Or if you decide you want to go to cities and that's one of your goals, what are we actually going to do? So these are kind of the doing parts, and these are the smaller goals that we're really working on. What does it take to go from a regional champ to a provincial champ? Or what does it take to go from a provincial champ to a national champ? Or of course, to the big dream goal there. So these are sort of like the doers, the things that we really need to dive into to get there. And of course, these are those process and performance goals. So same kind of information we just chatted about, it's just drawn out a little bit differently. And this might be able to help lay out a bit of a roadmap for your athletes if they're kind of saying, well, I have this huge dream goal and they're so hyper focused on it. Well, what are we actually going to do to get there? And I think it's really important for us to be guides for them, to make sure that we're able to help them get to that point. But we got to break it down into the little things. So we're going to talk about something called Choice Point, and this is likely new for all of you or most of you. It comes from an acceptance and commitment therapy model. I think it's really interesting because it talks about our values and what we're really looking for, and I think it applies so well to sport. So the basics of Choice Point is that all day long humans are just doing things. We're cooking dinner, we're drinking coffee, we're watching The Walking Dead. We're always doing something, even if it's just sleeping. And some things we do move us towards the life we want to live, or our values or your goals, right? So acting effectively, behaving like the kind of person we want to be, achieving our goals. We call these towards moves, okay? And some things we do move us away or further away from the life we want to live. So this is us acting a little more ineffectively, not turning towards our values or goals, behaving unlike the kind of person we want to be. And then we call these away moves, right? So pretty basic stuff here. Like sitting in my office here, cracking open a bag of mini eggs at my desk can totally be a towards move if I enjoy a handful and it's not doing much harm. But downing a Costco size bag isn't exactly going to bring me closer to my goals or fitting into my jeans for that matter. So that would be an away move. I think we all know, living on our computers the last while, there's a lot of people doing business on the top and sweats on the bottom. So one of our friends made a joke the other day, a colleague of mine, she said, well, let's make sure we're trying on our jeans every once in a while. So I think it could be a towards move. So, and it's always kind of based on what your athlete or what your client is thinking. So we don't want to necessarily dictate what those towards or away moves are, even though I think we have a pretty good idea of what that means. But remember, wanting buy-in from the athletes for their own goals. So they're going to determine what that looks like here and there. So when life is easy, it's fairly easy for us to choose towards moves. We treat ourselves the way we want to, we work towards our goals, we do the things that make life better rather than making life worse. But unfortunately, as we know, and current situation included, life isn't that easy all the time. So as we go about our day, all sorts of challenging situations and difficult thoughts and feelings arise. And it's kind of, it's easy to get hooked by those difficult thoughts and feelings. They kind of hook us and reel us in and pull us off track. And once we're hooked, we start doing those away moves a little bit more. But there are times when most of us are able to unhook. And we unhook ourselves from those difficult thoughts or feelings or situations, and we choose those towards moves instead. And this is when we're doing things that move us closer towards the life we want to live, closer towards our goals and our values. And the better we get at this, the easier our goals become for us. So when we're in these challenging situations and we're, experiencing those difficult thoughts and feelings, there's always a choice for us to make. And that choice is, how are we going to respond? Do we unhook and do more towards moves? Or do we get hooked and do more away moves? And for a lot of us, the default setting is when we get hooked, we tend to do more away moves. But when we really get clear about our goals, our values, what really matters to us, we find we have a bit more choice about how we respond. And it's easier for us to choose those towards moves over away moves. And the one thing that the great coaching guru Jason Sostrom refers to, and he'll totally kill me for calling him a coaching guru, but he is that these choices aren't just like seasonally, monthly, or biweekly. These are like the dailies, what he calls, and sometimes even the hourly choices, especially as we get closer to competition. If we're clear with our goals and values early on, it's easier for us to make those monthly, weekly, daily, or even hourly choices for us to get closer to them. So now what? If we can launch our second poll, that would be great, because I want to know from you, and let's make sure we're being honest here. I want to know from you, who has ever at one point or another in their career done goal setting on paper and then not looked at it again for the rest of the season? Maybe you filed it away. Maybe you just got too busy, because a coach fills so many different roles. You kind of filling the shoes of everyone around you, particularly when you don't have an integrated support team. So I kind of want to know who's ever done that before. Maybe it was early in your career. Maybe you are at the beginning of your career, but who's done that before and then not really looked at it again? I'm very curious to see. And I know that our, thanks for our game plan host for launching that poll for me. They give you usually about 30, 40 seconds to respond there.
Elaine, this is Kara. I just have to jump in. I'm feeling myself laughing because immediately it was, okay, I'll admit it, it was at 100%. It has slowed down a little bit, but overwhelmingly, I think there's a lot of people in the same boat.
Yeah, I bet. That's really funny. And I think it's just like, we have to be a little bit real about it, right? So we have to understand, okay, yeah, so 80%, way to go, those 13%, 87%, okay, I'll admit it, I've done this at one point or another. I think we do have to be kind of real about it, right? And I've seen this happen time and time again with all different levels of coaching staff too. It's really a difficult thing because coaches have so many things constantly in their day to focus on, particularly when they don't have that support team. So there's a lot there. And I understand that it can be really difficult to do what we want to do with it, but it will help. We know that it's going to help in the future. So if we kind of talk about now what, essentially we get to use what you've created. So you can do upside down goal setting, you can do SMART goal setting, you can kind of put it all together with your athletes. And if you put in that legwork ahead of time, it's going to be a lot easier throughout the season to make sure that we can stay on track. So don't file it away to never see it again. These are really important things. And I know that's never the intention, but it is quite easy for that to happen. We want to set up those one-on-one meetings. Again, depending on what kind of sport and sport culture you have and what this looks like. Are you doing one-on-ones casually in the daily training environment? Is it weekly? Is it bi-weekly? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? How often are you in that DTE with your athletes? Are they doing a lot of self-training? Are they training as a team or with you all the time? So it's important to kind of recognize, when are we going to be having that touch point so that we can alter our goals and work through, what are we really looking at here? Should we be changing this? And that's a really important point here, is to use it as a guide and be as flexible as possible. It's super important to make sure we're using the C in SMART goal setting and be changeable when we need to. There are so many different things that can come up within even a single season, and we have to make sure we're altering our goals appropriately. And to do that, a debrief will help. Doing consistent debriefs is really going to help us to be able to kind of shift and know where we need to be. Because remember, we're looking at a starting point. Where are we now? The bottom right hand of that sheet is, where am I going? And all the doing along the way, we might lay that out and it looks really perfect. Just like your yearly training plans might look really perfect. But as you know, they probably rarely stay the same. We know that we need to be altering them throughout the season. So we want to make sure we're being flexible with this. So we're going to talk about that debriefing, because this is the best way that you can actually alter your goals, is by doing solid debriefs. And debriefs, I know that sometimes we struggle with them, but we can really make them basic. So the basic framework of debriefing, in my opinion, is what worked, what didn't, and what are we going to do about it? I think that's just the best thing we can do. If we're getting those 3 questions, those 3 answers out of a debrief, I think we've mostly done our job there. So what worked? What did we like? What didn't? What do we not want to do again? And then how are we not going to do it again? Or how are we going to replicate what we liked? So that what are we going to do about it is where we're really going to start shifting our goal setting and sort of those little things, the doers along the way. We want to ask good questions, and good questions are super important for this, because you all have those different athletes where it's like, oof, I can't even ask. I know he or she's going to be upset. I have to like cool off or give them time, or I don't know how to ask, or they think that I'm upset with them. So we really want to make sure we're asking good questions. So we want to, as often as we can, get information before we give it. And there's a few ways to do that. We can do that by rephrasing as well. So instead of saying, hey, here's how that went, you could say something like, if you could race that again, is there anything you would do differently? Or how do you think that race went? Or just tell me about your race. Yes, they know that you've probably seen it, but we want to try and get the information from them instead, instead of you giving that first. Some open-ended questions can really help here. We want to avoid them by simply responding with what they think you want to hear. We're really wanting to help guide their own self-analysis. So if we can ask those open-ended questions, get the information from them, then you can really break down and analyze it, or hopefully help them self-analyze it, and we're guiding them along that way. So timing is everything. And some of you have more time than others. So some sports are very different. I was a swimmer a million years ago for the Dinos at UFC. And whenever I work with swim coaches now, oh my gosh, I did not appreciate what my coaches went through with a million athletes in the pool, it feels like, at a time. And you're doing your pre-race prep with them, and then they're all, getting out at different times. Sometimes there's multiple races, like back to back to back, and you're trying to do a quick debrief, and then you're immediately refocusing on the next athlete, and it can be so difficult. And so I really feel for coaches that work with multiple heats in a day. I think it's just incredible how that timing can be so important, because if we have time to let them cool down and debrief later, sometimes that can be great, because they've often maybe gone through it in their mind already. Some people will say, no, you got to strike when the iron's hot. I want to know everything right now. But remember, emotions can kind of get in the way, and that can be our emotions or the athlete's emotions. So if we can kind of park those emotions ourselves, that might help with the debrief process, because we know that athletes feed off of our emotions, and we feed off of theirs too. I mean, we're not immune to that just because we're in a position of power. We're not immune to feeding off the emotions of our athletes. And I've had so many athletes say, when we're working on a big competition prep, oh, and what can we do to support you and all that. I've had so many athletes respond, I just don't want my coach to freak out. Or when I look at them and I know they're nervous, then I start freaking out. And so we really do want to try to park our own emotions when we can. It's not saying to not have passion for your sport or for the event itself. It's just, we don't want to, fly off the handle. And alternatively, we don't want to make them feel like it's not important, right? So if we can park our own emotions, that's pretty helpful. We want to generally keep it short and purposeful. Kind of like how I'm trying to keep our session today, a little bit shorter and purposeful. So we're going to wrap up pretty quick here. But if we can keep it short and purposeful, we're going to have their attention a little bit better. The shorter we have their attention, and if we know we're giving just the basics and the necessary information, they're more likely to listen to it. If we ramble on and on and on, people tend to tune out a bit more. So, and they expect that will happen if that's what we tend to do. So they're going to tune out right from the beginning. So if we can keep it short and purposeful, that's a huge bonus. We want to debrief the performance, not the person or their character. And we tend to find this a lot with really young athletes, but of course, everyone can have this tendency sometimes. But younger athletes often think that a bad performance means that they're a bad person. So they kind of get that message if we're saying, well, this didn't work so well, this didn't go well, that was a poor performance. They really take that on as a character attack. For the little ones, if we have some coaches here working with younger athletes, we can do things like 2 stars and a wish or the Oreo technique. 2 stars and a wish could be, you know, 2 things that worked really well and 1 thing I want you to keep working on. So it can be like, wow, I loved how you kept your focus that whole time and your energy was also there the entire game. I really love that. 1 thing we're going to do is work on your passing a bit more, because I think that's something that we can make sure we implement in the next game. So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to do some passing drills. That would be 2 stars and a wish. Or Oreo technique would be 1 great thing, 1 thing to work on, and another great thing. So it could be, I loved your energy through that whole game. You really, man, it was like you could have taken that whole game over just yourself. You had the ball the entire time. The middle of that Oreo is going to be a bit more, we're really going to work on that passing though, because I want to see the ball moving to other people on your team as well. But we're going to wrap up with the other side of that Oreo or the other side of that sandwich or whatever you want to call this technique and say, but I love how that energy was there the whole time, or I love how you didn't give up the whole time, or I love how you are a really great team player. Whatever it is, we can usually find something like that. And we tend to talk about this with little kids, but adult athletes, we can also kind of slide this in because they want to know what's working as well. And I think your job as coaches is to make sure that you're making corrections and letting them know what's not working so we know what we can change. But we also need to know what's working well. And I've had a coach in the past whose athletes would say to me, you know, we don't ever get praise. We don't ever know like if we're doing something right. And her response was, well, if I'm not saying anything, you're doing it right. So like, what's the problem here? And that was her style of coaching, but they really had to have that conversation to have that message. So they were looking for some of that feedback, some of that positive feedback, that reinforcement of what's working. And she was essentially saying, well, I'm only correcting what's wrong. So having that conversation and having both of them understand, so they would understand that her tendency maybe isn't to do that, but she recognized that she needed to start working on what was going right as well. Because when we know we're doing something right, we want to continue it, right? So I think that can be pretty important. So we really want to, the biggest thing here though is to ensure that we're being honest. You know, we want to build trust, and while kids and everybody really loves praise, people trust those who are honest with them more. And I've learned this more and more and more over the years. When an athlete says, I know that I can trust my coach. I know that they'll be honest with me. They're not going to scream at me for doing something wrong, but they will say, yeah, we kind of messed up there. Here's what we need to do next time. They really do trust that coach when honesty is there. I think that's just so important for us to have. And then we obviously want to tell them what to do instead of what not to do. We want to focus on what went wrong for sure, but we're always wrapping up with an action or a command of something that we actually want to do instead of just harping on what not to do. Because particularly when we're under stress, it can be really difficult to flip that around in our brain. So if we kind of say, you're running down a flight of stairs quickly and you're saying, don't trip, don't trip, don't trip. Our brain kind of skips over that don't, right? All those filler words, and what our brain is really taking in this trip. So it doesn't mean that we're definitely going to trip on those stairs, but instead of that, we want to tell someone what to do. So we might say, okay, hover your hand over the guardrail, or, you know, watch where your feet are going or something. We want to tell them what to do instead of what not to do, particularly in those times of stress for both athletes and coaches. We know that it can be hard to figure out what we actually need to do if we're just focusing on what we're trying to avoid doing. And those don't always really compute there. So here's a handy little chart. You're always welcome to take a screenshot, keep this in your pocket, make your own infographic. Whatever it is, you might want to have one of these for yourself. So it's kind of the basics of what we've talked about today for debriefing. The top tips: tell them what to do, not what not to do, take our emotion out of it, ask some really great questions. We're here to facilitate and guide the athlete self-analysis and go through what worked, what didn't. So those basic 3, what worked, what didn't, what are we going to do about it? And that can help us to make a new plan and execute that new plan, right? Keeping in mind, both athletes and coaches have a responsibility in the debrief. And instead of all that, sort of all that pressure being on you, we have to have those conversations with our athletes to recognize you know, they really have responsibility here as well. And the more that we're doing appropriate debriefs, the better their recall will likely be after an event. So we want to really work on their own ability to recall. So we're asking those questions so they can start telling you what it was, getting the information before you're giving it, so they can analyze their own strengths, weaknesses, what worked, what didn't. And then of course, listening to feedback and executing a plan. And the coaches obviously listening first, providing feedback on that analysis, because they might have it way backwards based on what you saw. And then of course, depersonalize it. We're not attacking a person or character. We're just talking about the performance. And if the time works, delay if necessary, if emotions are high, or if you have the luxury of that time, which some of you certainly don't. So that's kind of the basics in terms of debriefing. And I think it just ties so well into goal setting, because that's the whole changeable piece of it. And I really want to emphasize that changeable piece. So I hope that that helps in terms of what you need for altering your goals, setting them in the first place, doing your debriefs, and altering as necessary. So first of all, there will be a survey that comes up. I believe our game plan advisor mentioned that it will pop up in the chat. So please do fill out a survey there. And then we want to make sure that you're signing up for this stuff. So register for the NCCP Basic Mental Skills to learn even more strategies for goal setting, and a whole bunch of other stuff too. So we really want to help coaches to integrate mental prep strategies into practice, and then help the athletes be more prepared for competition. So please do visit the site, talk to your representatives, and there's a ton of stuff that you can be doing at home, and online delivery at home study and all that kind of stuff. So we're just, I'm so pleased that Game Plan and NCCP are offering all these kinds of programs for you. So please do take advantage of them. And we would love to know if you have some questions.
So I'm ready for you.
Oh, you are? Okay. So I don't see, just so people know, I don't see any of the chat or questions. So this is exciting for me.
Okay, well, we'll see how excited you are once you start getting these drilled at you. Okay, let's just start with, well, for one thing, there's also some just nice comments, so I'll mix them in with my questions.
Awesome.
There's one here, fabulous presentation. Can you give examples of goal-related rewards?
Yeah, so we can have really, really simple rewards. I mean, for team sports, what do they want after a good practice? If we're talking about like a hockey or ringette team or sledge team, or what do they really want? They want to play. I mean, that's kind of the foundation of why people get into sports. Some of it's that, you know, that competition, but they really do want to play. And I think that brings the enjoyment factor back so much. So a lot of times we'll have kind of like the fun time or the play time at the end of a training session. And some coaches will say, okay, you guys have worked so hard. We nailed all our goals for this training session. We're going to scrimmage for an extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. So there can be some rewards like that in the team sport. Obviously, little kids, when you're having rewards, they like feedback. They like their parents getting some feedback. They like people to talk about how awesome they were, things like that. You'll find, you know, like soccer Little League coaches bringing out ice cream bars and all that kind of stuff. Oh, this was great. Everyone did so well. It doesn't have to be something physical like that, though. You know, we hear rewards, personal rewards. So let's say, you know, going back to the New Year's resolutions, I want to get more fit this year, or whatever it is. When you reach your goals, maybe you're not going to be like, I'm rewarding myself with pizza, because that's not in line with your current values, if it is, or if it's not. But maybe it's like a new workout clothes or a new pair of running shoes or something like that, sharing those. So I think as long as we're sharing that, the rewards can be a lot bigger than something material.
So everybody, I apologize for at the beginning asking you to put your questions in the chat box. If you could please put them in the Q&A box, that would be helpful, as I'm just reading questions from there right now. So Elaine, the next question for you is, could you please elaborate on delay if necessary for coach debriefing guide?
Yeah, so great question. Delay if necessary. So if you know, I think what we really have to think about here is intent or purpose behind it. If we know that we are not going to be getting through to the athlete, if we're not going to get anything out of this debrief, then we should probably delay that. Are we going to, because if you know your athletes better than anybody, is it going to really set them off? then we want to be working on those skills on the side and in the background and kind of front loading those earlier in the season. But if we know that a debrief in that high emotion moment isn't going to work, then maybe we're going to delay that, because that seems necessary if they're going right back into the next heat. So we want to just give a couple of quick, simple commands or cues, then that could be really appropriate. But if it's necessary, if we think they're going to get nothing out of it, or it's going to hurt the situation in the moment, we'd probably want to delay. But of course, we want to work on, and at another time, not when emotions are high. Why is it such a hard time to do a debrief right afterwards? Can we work on some of those emotional control techniques so we can get that information across?
So here's another one, accountability. Having a hard time helping an athlete to keep on the goals she decided on. Does this mean that the goal she has is actually not what it should be because she's really not working towards it?
Another great question. It could be not knowing, the athlete themselves or how we're working on it. I would say let's be really intentional with that goal setting. And it sounds like this coach said that it's a goal that she has set, which is great. So it's the athlete who has been setting this, which is one of the biggest pieces that we want, right? It has to be relevant to them. But I would dig a little bit deeper. I would maybe do more frequent one-on-ones. And even if that's just a touch point in the daily training environment, have those conversations of, okay, here's what the goal laid out and here's the plan we made around it. How is that going? Are you wanting to change this goal for some reason? And you might, as a coach, be saying like, well, we can't change that goal. That's what you have to get to the next level. That's what we're looking for. But we really want to have that conversation as more often than not. So we can even have a touch point in the daily training environment. And some athletes with that lower motivation will say, well, it's hard. I don't know what to work on. I'm not feeling like it. We've had coaches go through and say, okay, here is your goal for today. We're working on this as a group. Here's the plan, the training plan for the day. But this is the 1, 2, or 3 things that I want you to get out of today and to show that we're working closer towards our goals. So maybe it's a matter of breaking it down even smaller into those daily training goals. So that might be able to help.
Okay, here's another one. In working with para athletes, particularly those with cognitive difficulties, can you talk about engaging their parents or support workers in setting, working towards, and achieving goals?
Yeah, so there's varying levels of involvement when we're working in parasport and Special O. There's a ton of different levels of involvement there. So you may have a caregiver almost full-time, or you might have a guide full-time, or you might have higher parental involvement. So I would just say be really clear at the beginning of what the needs of the athlete are. So if we know what those needs are, we know who needs to be there to support, and then share that information with the team so that everyone can be on the same page moving forward. Because it's almost like it can be a trickier situation, because you'll have, a coach and maybe a support team and then a parent or a caregiver or a guide, and you've got all these other people around. So that's a lot of opinions coming in too. So we can be really clear at the beginning of, essentially you are the coach and you're the one working on that, but they also know that person likely very well and have their best interest at heart. So if we can be really clear about what those goals are, again, coming from the athlete and maybe even having some input from that wider team, that buy-in from them might be higher as well. And you might have more support for that athlete to achieve their goals.
We get so much coaching as coaches on how to help set the goals. The reality is when they are hard, they are often missed. Can you point me to any resources to help with the fall, for lack of a better word, when those big outcome goals are missed, or a big step along the way, wanted the Olympics but fell short at nationals, as an example?
Yeah, that's so tricky too, because like we mentioned earlier, you can feel like you've done absolutely everything under that goal. You've followed the plan perfectly. You've done everything you can. And the nature of sport is that someone might be faster or throw further or better technically. And so I think that's such a hard piece. But I think if we focus on what we're able to control the whole time, focus more on that process and performance and less on that outcome necessarily. We know the outcome's there. That's the kind of big dream goal often. but we really want to focus on that process. And if we can start using the language early on, it's not like, just so you know, you might not get it. I mean, we don't want to be a downer, but to use that language of, we're going to control what we can, and that's all we can do. So control the controllables, I think, is a really, really good message for that. And please feel free to email me, and I'll try to dig out some resources for you, because I know that that's a really tricky place when you don't make it. In some sports, some disciplines are super age dependent, obviously, and you may only have that one shot. So it can be pretty disastrous if it doesn't work out. But we know that there's kind of like only one winner. But I think it would be important to reach out, and I'll see if I can put you to some resources. Thanks for the question.
Elaine, what do you say to athletes that claim goals don't work for them, or they are so obvious it takes away it takes their attention away from their daily, weekly, and monthly process? Many have read books like Burn Your Goals, etc.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And everyone has a different style of goal setting too, right? What we often find is those like naturally gifted athletes who sort of get to that level relatively quickly based on those natural attributes. And then we have those other athletes that are kind of grinding it out until they can get to that point. And in general, not always, but what we can often see is that those athletes who are grinding it out are a little bit more dedicated with that goal setting, because things haven't maybe come, not as easy, but haven't come as naturally to them. And they're more likely to continue on with that formalized goal setting. Those who get to a certain point without it, who progress really quickly, might be like, what do I need my goal setting? This just comes, or I just have to work hard, and that's all that matters. But what we can do is kind of relate that to even a yearly training plan. A yearly training plan is often essentially goal setting as well, right? We're laying out the whole process to get to a certain place. So if they're following that YTP and you're altering that as necessary, that can sometimes be a good segue into what goals are actually working here, because coaches, you're using goal setting all the time. That's how you make your YTP. You kind of essentially do upside down goal setting as you're making your YTP sometimes. It just might look a little bit different. So all the doing in between, all the process and performance is all your training sessions, and you having those specific goals within that. I mean, you can change the language if you want and not necessarily use like goal setting as the language. But really what it is controlling what you can control.
Elaine, are there any specific goal setting apps that you like to use?
So I haven't found a perfect one, so no. There are some different programs that you can, even like desktop, like website type stuff, and cloud-based programs that you can use. I haven't found a perfect one, so I won't necessarily recommend any. But there are some where they can send you notifications, so you can have something like send me a notification every morning at 6:30 to get my button gear to do what I need to do, or whatever it is. You can have almost like, some of them have to-do lists built in them for a goal. You can use ones, what a lot of athletes are finding, which seems completely contrary to what the current situation is in terms of everything being online. A lot of them are loving those goal setting journals where they're writing it down and physically looking at it. And I'm seeing more and more late teens, early 20s athletes using those journal type paper and pen books, which is, I never expected that to happen. But there are some really, really great ones there too. But I don't have a specific app that I would recommend. But play around with it, see what works for you, because someone will say one's great and someone will say they hate it. So it really has to be independent of what works for you.
When is the best time to debrief? After an intense training session or right before the next training session?
Yeah, ideally neither. So sometimes we want to have it immediately after. Again, read the room, kind of see what's happening there. Is it appropriate? If it's a training session and you know that you can keep your own emotions in check, it's great to debrief soon after. We don't usually want to wait too long, although we say sometimes if it's not going to be effective, we want to wait. We often don't want to wait too long. Even a short debrief, just those 3 questions, just get the basic information. We'd like that done sooner than later. If emotions are high, wait if possible. come see me at the end of the day before you leave, go do your cool down, stretch out, and then come find me for your debrief, whatever that could be. But if we wait until the beginning of the next training session, if it wasn't a good one, it kind of feels like a bit of a negative way to start that next training session. So I think it's all about language. If we can make sure we're working on appropriate language with that, the sooner the better, unless it's going to make someone blow up, is what I'd say.
I have a goalkeeper who tends to overemphasize her strengths and negate weaknesses and can be overly defensive. This means that I perceive her to be a bit unteachable when I correct her, when I want to correct something.
Yeah.
I have used open-ended questions. I want to have her discover it herself, but she might avoid the answer.
Yeah, that can be so tricky. I had a baseball player, a pitcher once, and their coach was saying just their style of pitching. They said, your arm is great, but your shoulder is going to be gone within 2 years. And he was being scouted and looked at, and he honestly didn't believe that he was throwing the way that he said. And I'll tell you one thing, video does not lie. He was shocked when he watched video of himself because he had never really done video review, which I know a lot of you do that religiously. He had never done video review with his coaches. It was always offered to him, but he never did it. So when we started showing him video of what that looks like and slowing it down, he was blown away at what that looked like and really started taking steps to get there. So sometimes we can't tell someone that. We might have to show them that. So honestly, if we can use video for that, it might be really beneficial. We can send video of games to, you can stat it yourself. There's companies that will stat games for you, that will say, I mean, obviously this is for a goalkeeper. I don't know if this is for hockey or soccer or whatever, but, if we're using video, we can even clip it into small ones. You don't have to do, a 90-minute video session. We can clip the main points we want to show and a little bit of lead in, because if this person's quite defensive, they're going to say, yeah, well, I made that mistake, but it's because so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so did this. So if we can have the lead in, so there's always context to a clip, that might help them to be able to see it a bit better.
Do you have any suggestions to help inspire athletes to focus on mental training, such as visualization, etc., now during the COVID crisis?
Yeah, great question. Again, we're not all going to come out of this with everything being perfect. And I think that was kind of what has been laid out in social media so much of like, now you've got all this time and everything's going to be amazing. Look at everything you could do. I've got to be realistic about it. There's only so much we can do, but I would recommend keeping it short and simple. So for athletes that maybe haven't done visualization or much of it before, I would have them do, 5 minutes a day for the first while, and then we can up it from there, but see what they can bring into it. A really great one for visualization I like is to have your athletes close their eyes, and you can even take them through this on the phone, on Zoom, on whatever. You don't even have to have video on, and have them kind of go do a bedroom tour. So that might sound a little creepy at first. It's not. Have them imagine, what is the furniture like in my room? What color? How many pillows do I have? If I open my closet, can I see what's hanging there? Can I imagine taking a shirt off of a hanger and putting it back on and hanging it back up? Can I imagine opening the door and closing the door? What's on the walls? Is there a trash bin? Is there a desk? Is there a computer? Do I have laundry on the floor? The more that they can kind of get comfortable with a comfortable place, and a lot of athletes, their bedroom is probably the most comfortable place, more than the rest of their house. But for those who are older, living on their own, give me a kitchen tour. So they're not explaining what their bedroom looks like to you. You're just asking open-ended questions. Do you have any? Do you tend to see that you have any, clothes on the floor? Can you picture the size of your dresser? Can you picture the color of this? Can you picture what's on the walls? What does the floor feel like under your feet? And afterwards, you're debriefing. They're not telling you about their bedroom. You're just saying what was easy and what was hard. And they can kind of practice that. They might say, yeah, I couldn't really feel a doorknob. And it felt like when I walked to the other side of my room, I was just like, I teleported there. I didn't walk there. So we're just getting used to doing things like that. Go for a walk around your house or your apartment. Go up the stairs, go down the stairs. See if we can really get used to the basic things. So, but I would start really, really simple. Something like 5 minutes a day would be plenty just to get them used to it.
So we're bumping up against 11 o'clock here. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll just let everybody know that we will do our best to answer any questions that didn't get answered. We'll type some kind of response to you. So our last question here, in a team sport, how important is it to link the individual goals of the athletes to the team goals? Do we have to link them through the athlete's role in the team? Mostly in a decentralized team?
Ooh, yeah, it's tricky when it's a decentralized team for sure. So being decentralized, they're probably going to be working a lot more on individual goals. But again, those are the doer things. So in a team, our outcome goals are kind of the big things we want the team to achieve. And then as we go through that upside down goal setting with the arrows, it's all going to be about what are we actually doing to get there. So you might have two separate sides of that. What are our team process goals? What are we going to do as a team? And then what are we doing individually? And that individually might be based on what position they play or what role they have in the team. So you're probably going to have both. But if they're decentralized, you might find you're focusing a little bit more on those individual goals there. And then when you're together, using those individual goals to create the big team goal. So we know that those should always be intertwined. The individual goals that we have should always be lining up with what those team goals are. It's just a matter of what are we doing to get there. It's the doing part.
Well, thank you so much, Elaine. There's lots of questions still to be answered. Unfortunately, we've just bumped up against time, but as I mentioned earlier, we'll do our best to get all of those questions answered for the rest of you. The link to this session, we recorded this, it will be sent out in case anybody missed it or for those that want to listen to it again. Thank you all for joining. There are going to be many more of these sessions, so keep checking your inbox. The information is going to keep coming at you, and if you have suggestions for topics, we're willing to take those as well.
Awesome.
So have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Everyone.